talked a little bit, addressing in parts the athletics aspect of this change, and really just looking at maybe athletics specifically and after-school activities in general. Obviously, that's going to be one of the biggest components of this change is how do those activities sort of line up with this new school day. What have the discussions been like to that? I know that there are still answers that you guys are looking into, but where has that discussion kind of gone to this point?
Well, Pete Boucher, the athletic director, he's on our committee too. He's currently out of district, otherwise he'd probably be here too. But, I guess, truthfully, Peter's concerns are with our away games. There are a couple different districts, 4 or 5 different districts anyways, that are a good hour away. So there are some like in the fall, for example. I think in the fall is when it would be most problematic. If you have a soccer game that's in Taunton and we get out of school at 3 o'clock, how could we get there for a 4 o'clock start? So we'd have to work with the Hockomock League and be able to make adjustments to schedules, which I think they all can be done. It's just a matter of having those conversations and having other communities be open to adapting to the changes that we made. So I think that's probably one of the biggest issues. Practice times are going to shift a little bit. Up to, I would think about a half hour or so. The earliest they could get on a field is probably 3:15, where now maybe teams are starting at 2:45 or so. And because of that, there are some students that do both sports and music. So music practices, in some instances, start after athletics. So it would kind of push that back for another half hour. But then one of the other things that we had to consider was about adjusting school times. As Mr. Morcone already said, we can't have all the buses out on the streets at the same time for a number of reasons, money being one, but congestion being another. And then trying to find manpower to drive the buses is another problem. But if we flipped the 2 times, the elementary schools would get out before the high schools and middle schools, which would mean that from our survey data, we found that there were a lot of families that rely on high school and middle school students to pick up their younger siblings in school at the elementary schools. So if we flip them, it wouldn't be able to happen. So there'd be a whole group of people that would certainly have to find a different way. So I think that was another consideration that we did. I don't know if anybody else has anything else to add about that. I can't remember if I...
We talked a little bit about the nighttime, when it would start to get dark out, and
Yeah.
whether or not, to be conscious of if it was going to be dark and we had students, walking home from a bus stop. So
Right.
certainly that was a factor that we talked about as well.
And then the other point being, if the elementary did start early, we'd have elementary students at bus stops at 7 o'clock in the
That's
morning.
right.
In the winter when it's dark, and I don't think we really want that. So that's why we looked more at starting, say, 8:30 and then 9 o'clock.
Yeah.
That seems to make the most sense. One of the things, going back to sports, luckily in Milford, we have 2 turf fields that are lit.
Yep.
So that does help us a lot, and I think a lot of the communities around us are doing the same things for a lot of reasons. I mean, it is New England, so it is tough to keep grass. So the turf field makes sense. They can be used, all different hours, and it gives the flexibility to the sports teams to play a little later. I know you don't like them.
Athletes, it's been shown when you change the start time to a later time that the athletes do better.
Mm-hmm.
They do better on the field, and they do better academically as well. So it certainly helps all the adolescents and not just the chosen few.
Mm-hmm.
So really worthwhile I spoke to Pete about this before,
Mm-hmm.
that it benefits the athletes. They may have to change their times and have it be inconvenient and stuff, but they're going to do better.
And And that's an important point, because I think, a lot of the things that we talked about and a lot of the barriers, sure, it involves students, but most of them are kind of adult, I don't know, the adult issues, I guess is the best way to put it, but they're things that adults are used to. They're used to having it a certain way, so adults would have to adapt kind of either their behavior or their way of thinking around whichever decision we made. So I think that was an important discovery for us, that all signs point to health-wise, both physically and emotionally, socially, it makes absolute sense to make this change. Are people going to be inconvenienced, and are people going to have to make changes in their lives? Absolutely. So we just have to work together to try to help everybody make the adjustment.
And I think the great way that you've laid that out in communication that I've had with you is kind of looking at the technical changes versus the adaptive changes in making a move like this. And Nicole, maybe I can start this part of the conversation with you. A lot of those adaptive changes are those ones that are going to happen at home, with parents, whether it's routines of getting kids to and from school, whether it's the just changes in family routine. How is that something that when you start to think about potentially if you were to implement those changes in your lives in your own life, how difficult that would kind of be to navigate, at least in the early days?
Yeah, so I think for me personally, a little less than maybe some families that have younger kids. So my kids are older. It will mean that my husband and I will probably have to leave for work before our kids have to leave for school, but they're old enough that that they can get themselves out of the house okay and get themselves to school. For families with younger kids, that is going to be more of a challenge to deal with. And so that's certainly going to be a big adjustment if you've got littler kids who are in the elementary schools and you've got to be at work at one time and school starts later. That's going to be a big challenge. I think at the high school level, it's probably a little bit less of a challenge. I think it will probably make my house a happier place in the morning. Yeah, exactly. A few less cranky kids wander around.
Right.
But yeah, I also appreciate that. Again, my kids are older, and so they are much more independent and able to get themselves to school than people with younger kids.
And I would say, my children are a little bit younger, and we, as a family, have always had to try to figure out plans for morning and after school, because really, the school day doesn't meet the needs of, even though I work in a school system, it doesn't entirely meet the needs of my work schedule and our family. So we've always had to make different arrangements for the morning for our children and after school. And I think that when Mr. Morcone could speak about the community use extended day programs that we have at the elementary schools, and there are hundreds of children that come to school for morning extended day. So we start at 7 at Memorial School, and there's students that participate in extended day after school, because really the school day for most families that are working doesn't really work, and you often have to come up with different plans for your children as well. So I think that we're, as Mr. Consigli had mentioned, we start talking about that as a group, but everybody's family needs are so diverse and different that we have to make the decision what's best for children and adolescents, and then kind of work through those changes as a community.
Mm-hmm.
Another aspect that will be impacted by this is obviously teachers and faculty members at the school. What have the conversations been like with faculty members, and what's maybe the feedback there on how they might adapt to a change like this?
Again, it runs a gamut. There are people that are 100% for it, and there are people that, for one reason or another, aren't so sure. Some of the things that I've heard from staff members is certainly childcare. If I work here in Milford and I have my children go to school in another district and they start earlier and get out earlier than me, then I'm going to have to try to rearrange things to figure that out. Other concerns were, you know, if I have a job, I work in this district, but then I have a job after school, that's going to all change as well. So again, like you had mentioned, we can make the change, we can put it on paper, but people are going to have to make these adaptive changes based on their own lives, really, and their own lifestyles. So those are just a couple of different examples. And I'll go back to what Dr. Perriello said, science is science, and I think the research has bared out that it's proven fact that it's most beneficial for adolescents.
I really appreciate all of you taking the time to join us today. I guess I would close, Craig, with just sort of a broad question of what comes next. Where does the committee go from here? What are maybe the next steps moving forward?
So I don't know, by the time this airs, we probably would have gone to school committee already with a recommendation. But our committee meets monthly. But a couple of the things that we're doing right now is we're surveying some of the area superintendents around us to find out what the conversation has been in their communities around school start times. I've been in contact with the Chamber of Commerce. We have a meeting scheduled so that we can kind of talk through maybe some of the employers' concerns in the region. And then, you know, I think once we get through all of those barriers, we're just going to keep trying to listen to voices and see if we can make adjustments to whatever we're going to consider. So I think whether it's public forums or just having coffee with people, I think it's important that if people have concerns, they find one of us and just lay out your concerns so we can try to address them.
This is Milford TV News and Sports Director Tim Coet. Make sure you check out new editions of the Milford Informer every Friday at 7:30 p.m. or during one of our 8 convenient re-air times throughout the weekend. You can also find individual news stories as well as full archived editions on our YouTube page, My Milford TV. If you live in the greater Milford area and have an idea for a news story, you can tweet at us using the handle @Milford_TV, or you can contact me directly by sending an email to news@milfordtv.net.